Hello and welcome back to GI Sprint. I'm James Battister, Editor-in-Chief of GamesIndustry.biz. I am joined by a panel of experts today to talk about failing fast. So, as you know by this point, GI Sprint is about finding ways that developers can make their games for faster, better, cheaper, finding ways to make your games a lot more efficiently. A large part of that is making sure the game you're working on is the right one, making sure that the game you're working on is likely to kind of make it all the way to the end of production, is set up for a good release, and kind of abandoning concepts that aren't working, at an early stage, so you don't lose too much time and you can get started on your next hit. I am joined, as I said, by an absolute panel of experts, wonderful, wonderful developers here with us. So I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves in turn. Dominique, we're going to start with you. If you could give a little brief introduction as to who you are.
My name is Dominique, and I work at FreeLives, a game development studio based in Cape Town, South Africa.
Lovely. Tony.
Hey, I'm Tony Gowland. I run Ant Workshop, which is a little indie developer in Scotland.
And Rami.
I'm Rami Ismail. I'm an independent game developer. I used to run a studio called Vlaambeer, and nowadays I consult with independent developers on how to make games in good ways with good people make good games.
Wonderful stuff. Right, we've got 45-ish minutes, so we're going to dive straight in. When is the right time to abandon a game? If the amount of time I don't make games, I imagine you must get months and months into production before you realise this is not quite working. When do you abandon things?
As soon as possible.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, back at my old studio at Vlaambeer, we would often kill games within 2-3 days of first prototype. Just, you play it. At that point, a game is squares and circles and triangles and maybe a grid, and there's maybe a little bit of work on some game feel or some sounds or a little basic VFX, but it's mostly very bland at that point. If that isn't fun to play for 5 minutes, then we're done. We move on to the next one, and that's still what I teach. That's still what I do when I make my own games. If we can't make it fun in a week, 2 weeks, then we're not sure there's something at the core there, and it's time to move on.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of looked at it as setting about a month or something. It's because there's always that temptation, isn't there, of oh well, maybe it's if we change this, or maybe it's if we do that, and it's you need to have that kind of hard and fast kind of cut off of no, you can't just keep iterating on that, and you can't just keep throwing new things at it.
I guess this is a bit more subjective then, but how do you know a game is not working? Rami, you mentioned if the game is not fun to play, what sort of things are you looking for beyond kind of gut feeling?
I mean, there's two things I look for, because there's two parts of this equation, right? The first part is, do people have fun interacting with it? And so if you have this early prototype and we put it in somebody's hands and they throw off, because they're focused on the game, or they're smiling, or they're laughing, or they have a good response, if they keep playing for 5 minutes, 10 minutes while we're having a chat, if they get excited about what the game could be, all of those things, those are indicators that we look for. And it's not a science, it's very much a feeling thing. I think the other part that we look for is it fun to make? Which is a really big part of the equation, because I'm going to be dedicating 1/15 of my games left in my career to this. Assuming a game takes 2 to 3 years, if you just calculate the amount of time I have left before I'm 65, I don't have that many. So I also want to make sure that at that point it's fun to work on it, and that takes a little bit longer. Normally we sort of pull that into the more vertical slicey part of game development, but the abandon a game for me is very early in prototype. If we can't get it past those two questions, then let's move on. There's hundreds of ideas out there.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same for us at FreeLives. We these away jams with the whole team where people get into teams or groups or even on their own and will prototype, and they have 2 weeks to come up with something. And at the end of those 2 weeks, if the rest of the studio isn't having fun playing the game, and or the developers are not really feeling like they want to work on this anymore, then it gets abandoned. And we've did some pretty fun and awesome ideas at that stage, but we really do try to drive it home that, you know, getting attached to not a really great idea is way better than getting attached to a nice and good idea, which can, as Rami says, it's like it takes 2 to 3 years to make a game, so you better be extremely sure that this is something you want to spend your life on, you know, because it is time spent. And then our other way of testing it is once it's past kind of those tests, is whether, you know, so the devs want to make it, we're having fun playing it, and it's a fully playable prototype by the end of 2 weeks. Then what we'll do is we'll upload it onto itch.io as independents, not as the studio. And we'll now see what the market thinks. You know, do other people outside of our circle find this fun to play? And yeah, I mean, we have abandoned games that had, like, you know, more than 20,000 downloads and loads of comments, even after it's gotten to that point where then we'd had to be like, okay, so is this game going to be affordable to make? You know, because then you've got to start asking those questions. And if we feel that this is going to be something that's going to cost too much money or take too much time or need too big of a team to create, then we also say no. So that's the other side of it, because we like to work in small, compact, high performance teams rather than having these massive teams. And yeah, so those are all the boxes that need to be ticked. And if the prototype does tick all those boxes, then generally that's what we choose to take into development.
Yeah, I mean, we're a small team. There's only 7 of us in the whole company, so it's like we, at the kind of an outset of a process for us, it's like we all split up, and it's like literally one coder per idea pretty much, and like everyone just bashing out. And like it's really interesting because most of the team obviously don't have any investment in someone else's idea, so it's like there isn't that kind of like, oh well, I've spent ages working on this and that kind of thing. So people can be quite honest, and like you can tell quite quickly. And as well, because you have a few things coming through all at the same time, it's like really easy to kind of compare them against each other and be quite honest about like, well, which one of the, like, do I want to play that, or would I rather be going back and playing this other one a little bit more instead? And yeah, like once we got past that kind of stage with things, and everyone on the team quite likes a thing, we've been sending them out to like other industry people that we trust quite a lot, and just kind of like, look, our whole team's into this. Are we mad? Or like, do you think that there's something in this idea as well? And just like, again, getting that like tiny little bit of external validation of like, is there something sensible in here? And in particular, like the other thing for us is whether there's an idea of like, okay, if this thing takes off, can we keep building more of it? Like, is there is there content updates? Is there DLC? Is there like that kind of like, if we get super lucky and this happens to be the one, like, is it a thing that's got more legs to it, or is this just like we've made a 2-hour long story driven thing and that's that?
I think one thing that's interesting is, even though we have very different studios and very different sort of like genres and things we work on, I think the process that we go through ends up by necessity being very similar, which is you have your prototype stage, which is very R&D, very like get something quick, you know, weeks of work. We're not talking months, we're not talking 6 months, we're talking like preferably a week, 2 week, 3, maybe a month, depending on the genre you work on. You know, if you're doing an RTS, those are usually more systemic. Figuring out whether those are interesting might take a little bit more time. If you're doing a shooter game, you should probably have that feel good within like 2 or 3 days of working, because otherwise, like, what are you doing? So depending on the genre, it shifts a bit. And then for the second stage, what you notice is that all of us sort of switch to validation and confirming that this is something we want to work on. And then after that, external validation, which Tony mentions, sending it to other developers, which I frequently do. Dominique uses itch.io. Back in the days at Vlambeer, we used Flash versions of our game. We just put the Flash version up, and if that blew up, okay, great, we'll make this game. And then finally, there's some sort of like business consideration, which is, okay, this is cool, this is fun, should we do this? And for some people, that comes down to, you know, Dominique, like Dominique said, figuring out the financial and like economic, the sort of timeline reality of the project, or Tony sort of like being extendable. Can we continue working on this? Is there an opportunity to grow? Or for a lot of developers, pitching it to publishers, right? Getting it to that vertical slice point where there's a bit of mock-up art, there's a bit of key art, there's, you know, like a good idea of what the game is, and then being able to sell it might be the next step. But it's a very gated process, and I think what I'd like hearing is that all of us have our own sort of like very well defined, like we gave very clear answers. They're not the same answer, but all of us really know like this is how it works for us, and we've clearly sat down and had these conversations with our teams to make sure these are not things that just start dragging out, you know? Oh, this is cool. Maybe if we spent one more week. It's like, no, we said 2 weeks. Done, right?
Yeah, I mean, with the thing with the publishers, what you mentioned as well, like, and when Dominique was saying about like the kind of that scoping of stuff, very much from the outset, we've set out with things of, right, this has to be something that we can make. Like, if no publishers are interested in it, we don't want to be in a situation where we've spent 6 months of our time and money building something where if we can't get extra money in, it has to stop. It's like this has to be a game where there is a 6-month version of it that is entirely within our team's ability. And sure, if it gets ahead of steam and we want to kind of keep going with that, and we do get some external investment or what have you into it, then that's brilliant. But like, I see a lot of stuff where people are building things where if they can't get extra money coming in, that's just a dead end. And we really didn't want to do that.
Yeah, and I also think, you know, people have to realize that the top 10% of selling games on Steam are pretty much the ones making all the money on Steam. The rest of that 90% aren't making any money, and are studios that are either closing or have lost a considerable amount of money or probably never make a game again. So, you know, just to kind of add to that is that this is why you have to be damn sure your idea is good, because what you're aiming for is to be in that top 10%. You have to be in the top 10% of best games selling on Steam if you want to continue to make games. So there's no time to be wasted, you know, sitting on an idea and refusing to surrender that this idea is possibly not a top 10% idea. And, you know, I think like FreeLives is we've kind of almost become like, you know, evangelical about this process, where we keep telling people, because we work with a lot of young developers and who are trying to start getting into the industry or wanting to open their own studios, and we just keep trying to drill into them, like, move on from this idea. And you'd be amazed at how impossible it is for some people, to their own detriment. They will hang a noose around their neck with this terrible idea before sitting down and actually going, okay, maybe I should move on and think of something else, you know. People are just so married to their concepts, and this is just something we hope never happens at our studio, because we just see that is the guaranteed way to never be a successful indie developer, is just being too committed to your ideas.
I think one thing to add to that I think is interesting is that it's also this idea of what a game is something that you develop over time. Like, when you start, you have these like big moments in your mind, or these like beautiful areas, or this specific thing that works in your brain, like, you know, like fighting a dragon with a sword, you know, like, and in your brain that's like you jump up and you slash at the neck and the head comes off, and then when you try to program it, it's like, no, we're going to be standing at the feet hitting the hit button, and there'll be one sword animation, and we're going to hit the leg, and that's going to do -3 HP, right? So when people are coming into the games industry, they very often are married to this thing that they know they'll have to do later in development. And so what they'll do is they'll stretch out the part of getting there, and they'll focus on all the wrong things. They'll focus on like making it very beautiful, or like writing out the entire plot line, or the lore book, or like a Bible for like the entire story of what the world is going to be. And then when they get to the point where they actually have to program that part where you slash at the dragon's neck with a sword, they realize, oh, actually this doesn't work. And they're 6 months in, they're a year in, and they're chasing this North Star of a thing that, frankly, they could have tested in like 2 days. Like, can I make it fun to hit a thing? Can I make it fun to hit a rectangle on a big square? If yes, then we can probably do the dragon thing. If no, then we probably can't do the dragon thing, and we should figure out what to do with it, right? The other thing that I think is really important is we're never buying certainty, right? We're and this is kind of a weird part, but like we are entrepreneurs, which means we're taking risks. Like even with everything aligned with best processes, making sure you test your game on itch.io, get a publisher, like build the game efficiently, quickly, prototype hard, break eggs, make omelets, develop the game carefully, make it well, make it expandable, modular, like whatever way you do it. I tell my teams you're buying coins. You're buying coins, and at the end of the thing, at the end of the whole journey, you get to flip the coins. And if more than 10, 15, 20 of the coins land head, you might make enough money. So every right decision you're making is not buying you success, it's buying you a coin flip. And then at the end, you flip them.
Going back to Rami saying the word dragon a lot there brought me in mind of... it brought me in mind of Skyrim. We've been talking about the concept of of abandoning games entirely, but I'd also like to talk a little bit more granularly in terms of features. Like Rami saying dragon a lot made me think back to like the original features that they announced for Skyrim are things like there was going to be an economy, so if you killed the lumberjack in one village, the wood trade would just dry up, etc. And they abandoned that because it became, I don't know the full details, but I believe it just became too complicated. It didn't work out. When you're looking at the features in your own games, like, at which point do you realise something isn't quite working? Like everything else is working, the game is fun to play, you think there's a great idea here in this particular feature or mechanic or whatever. At what point do you realise, no, we're going to have to just cut this?
I mean, same answer.
Yeah.
As soon as possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've been trying, like, so for example, Restless Runes, like our current thing, we've been doing a lot of, like, you get a thing to a certain point and it's like, okay, this is kind of good, like this feature's kind of good, but we're still in early enough days and kind of like working quickly enough with it that we're able to kind of prototype like new ideas around that. So like there's been a few things like in terms of like the structure of the game and like kind of what the players' goals are and all of that sort of stuff, where it's like, yeah, sure, we've worked towards a thing that's fine and decent and it's like pretty good fun, and then kind of like really pulled it back and gone like, okay, but maybe that's just like a little local maxima, and it's like, let's take a step back and kind of like really look at what we're trying to do with it, and is there, knowing everything that we know about it from like the last week's worth of development and playing, is there a better approach to this? Like, can we fiddle around with it a little bit more and throw some more ideas at it? And yeah, it's essentially it's the same kind of like prototyping thing. Like, prototyping doesn't have to be a whole game at once or a whole game idea at once. It's like it's prototyping features, and then if that feature doesn't work, right, either get rid of it or think of like try a different approach that has a similar kind of like result or that gets you the same results as what you're after, and then see whether that version works better, and maybe that's where you end up going.
I think features always have a purpose, right? Like you're doing them for a reason. There's a reason you want this thing to work. It like closes a loop, or it like allows players to have a certain experience or feeling. And very often there are ways of achieving that through alternatives. But the thing I normally work in the teams I work with, I have this concept of one-way doors, and it's very much inspired by all the flying I do. When you're at the airport. And you exit the airport after you came out of an airplane, you know how there's always the sort of like two doors. If you go through them, you can't go back. Mm-hmm. So I tell my teams there's one-way doors in this process, right? Like, and before you go through the door, most people, if you look at the doors, they will check whether they have their passport, their phone, their wallet, like in their suitcase, whether all of their stuff is with them. that's what I ask of my teams, like when I work on games as well. It's like, okay, we're now at the end of prototyping. We want to switch to vertical slice. Is the sort of like the glue of this game, is it working? Are the core features there? Like, do we have a solid enough foundation that if this feature topples over, this will stand sturdy enough that there is still a game? Like, or are there things that are so critical to the house of cards of what we're building that if we pull that card out, there's no way to save the game anymore? Because if that is still there, I would rather fix it here, because as soon as you go through the door, every step you take away from that door is space you want to walk back if you change something back there. So the further into development you go, the more expensive it frequently becomes to fix things, because we're building houses of cards, often quite literally. So the one-way doors for me are super important when it comes to features, and I take a very similar sort of like, there's a structure, a process that we agree on how we implement these things. And sure, sometimes things change very last minute, like it is game development. Like, we're not going to pretend there's a perfect way of doing this, but at that point, triage becomes a really big thing. That's a very big production sort of question of like, okay, get the team together, figure out the solution to this problem. But I think that's an entirely separate like sprint episode to discuss triage properly. But I think that would be my main sort of like thing I would like to communicate, is this idea of one-way doors, of like, let's keep, like Tony was saying, really like keep a similar process, like have a process, agree on it, then do that.
I want to go back to something that Dominique was saying, which was about how on Steam, for example, only the top 10% of games are making any money, and like 90% of them are struggling. I feel like we've really become aware of how competitive, how difficult this market is now to have like one of the biggest successes, because it's wonderful that the barriers to entry are down. Anyone can make a game. I can make a game. It will be rubbish, but I could do it. But the downside is, but not everyone can make a great game. Not everyone can make a popular game, and this is true across all forms of development. I've actually been speaking recently, like to AAA, owners of massive publisher groups, who've talked about like a release has come out and it's like, well, we think this was a really good game, but if it's not the best in its genre, then it's not going to be enough to shift it and to reach players and stuff. Like, I guess I want to get your thoughts on like how the expectation, how the barriers for success, the bar for success has risen over the last few years, and how that impacts how important it is to fail fast, I guess.
I think it's a direct impact on failing faster, because yes, it is more competitive. I mean, my background was in the music industry before I joined the games industry, and I'd say that where games are at now is where sort of music was coming out of the 70s into the 80s. It was kind of this golden age where the bands were all making a lot of money. The concerts were huge. The hotel rooms were being comped and all of that, and then the noose got tighter and tighter and tighter as the more competitive the industry became and the more accessible making music became to younger generations. And it's pretty much, I see a similar path for gaming, that yes, as you say, more and more kids will be able to use software that makes it absolutely doable for them to make a playable game. And which encourages that fierce competitiveness, but at the same time, yes, like makes it that what you're creating in order to stand out has to be superb, because where music and games are very different is you're asking your audience to sit down and really devote their attention and time to what you have made. A song someone can play for 10 seconds and then turn it off and move on to the next one. This is not really the case with games. So you have to you have to make something truly special. And I also, kind of just thinking off the top of my head, that 10% of people that are doing super well on Steam, I see it as, it's like a graph like that, and at the bottom on that gentle curve at the bottom before it becomes exponentially steep, where the real Call of Duty guys are sitting over there. This is where there's still room for beautiful games to come in and do well. So they're not making the multi hundreds of millions of dollars that maybe a game like Call of Duty is making, but there's still that gentle curve of doing well enough to possibly fund your own next project. If you had to find publishing funding for the first one, where you can become self-sustaining, you can manage your business with a level of certainty that you have a future, or at least for the next couple of years, and make more beautiful games.
Yeah, I think as well, it is so competitive, that whole thing of making more smaller bets rather than kind of putting all of your eggs into one big expensive basket is a much better approach to things. I mean, even within everything that is going on in the industry, it's you still see things like Lethal Company, for example, where it's successful because it has kind of done something a bit different and kind of given people something new, but it didn't need the same budget as Call of Duty or as an Assassin's Creed or any of that kind of thing. And there's breakout hits like Balatro and things like that. It's you don't necessarily giving people something new and doing something that is cool and that really appeals to a bunch of people doesn't necessarily mean this needs a $2 million budget or something like that. I think that, for me personally, I think that that's where a lot of developers should be kind of heading, is this thing of let's try more smaller things and see what hits, rather than putting all of your like I said, our last game, Dungeon Golf, we spent a couple of years making that, and then it I'll be honest, it completely tanked when it came out, and it's okay, well, we can't do that again. So that approach, I think, is just not sustainable.
I think it's partially about redefining what success means as well, right? We're in a time where we see what failure looks like, and that's not a fault of the people per se, but sustaining a games company is hard. It's not easy. This is an ever-changing market. If you ask any of us what the games industry looks like 5 years from now, we have no idea. But we are making 2 to 3 year bets for most of the games that we're working on, or even if they're shorter games, we're still 1 to 2 years. I don't know what the games industry looks like in a year from now. But if you look at last year's game of the year, what was last year's game of the year? What was it? What was the game of the year of 2023?
Baldur's Gate.
I forgot.
Oh,
Baldur's Gate, right. Based on that, none of us will be able to predict what's going to be the game of the year this year, right? The conversations we're having right now are about Balatro and about games like that. And those are the games that people are sort of looking at. But if you go back a year, before Baldur's Gate, I don't know what the game of the year was of 2022. I keep forgetting what the game of the year is. But there's no predicting the games industry, right? There's just no way of doing it. I didn't expect VR. I didn't expect free-to-play. I didn't expect any of those things. They just kind of happened. But if you ask me how to start in the games industry, it's make Flash games, which has not been viable for 15 years now, right? So the truth of this industry is that you're always going to be on the back foot when it comes to predicting what's happening. We don't have the same resources that these AAA companies have to predict what the market is going to look like. And even with that data, they often swing and miss, right? So for me, success as a games developer is to be able to make another one. And that's genuinely good enough for me. So if I can get my game funded before I start by a publisher, and the publisher pays a little more than that so I can keep going for 6 months after that and I get a nice rev share, if I can sign on that, I'll generally take that, because why not? Risk is gone. If I have the money to self-publish it, I'll self-publish it, but I'll make it a little smaller and a little bit more risk-averse, just to make sure that if I swing and miss, I'm not in a situation where I immediately have to sign whatever deal comes my way to make the next one. And in some cases you get on a streak and things start flowing and then things accelerate, and that's very much what happened in my career, and that's been very lucky, but it's also just not the reality of how game development works for most people. You have to make sure that whatever you do, when you're done with your game, you have the time to prototype the next one, to vertical slice the next one, to get to figuring out funding or to figure out how to self-fund it. And if you make that your modicum of success, there's actually a fairly large amount of games that succeed at that. But they're not success like we used to think about it. You know, it's not like the Alexander Bruce Antichamber, Minecraft, Among Us, Hades, sort of like, you know, those are not the successes we're talking about. We're talking about, in the world of photography, making a really good photo that allows you to do this for another 2 years and buy a new camera. That's great. Like, if we can make that game success, we can make games for another 2 years, for another year. Great, awesome.
I'm going to back up what Tony was saying about the idea of making smaller games to kind of like not putting too many eggs in one massive expensive basket. Like, it makes sense. Tony and I actually had a conversation about I think the way you phrased it was making singles, not albums, which should be going live around GI Sprint. So keep an eye out on GamesIndustry.biz for that interview. But yeah, we kind of dive a lot more into that. Like, I guess to go to that then, like, your thoughts on the benefits of making smaller games and starting smaller, particularly for kind of newer developers, I guess, because there's always you always get those indies who come out and say, all right, we're going to make a brand new World of Warcraft, or yeah, we're going to make this huge open world game. It's like I guess setting yourself realistic expectations when you start out for your project. Like, how important is that to failing fast?
I mean, even the veterans who try that fail. Right, like, you know, the 5 people from Ubi who quit and got funding in 2022 when the market was up, they've all failed. Like, none of them survived that. Making small things is absolutely the right answer right now, but we don't mean small games in that they're short to play. We mean games that are easier to compartmentalize and to develop in a way that is fast and that allows you to test quickly. So if you look at a lot of the hits right now, you'll see small, elegant systems. Like, at the heart of it is something small and elegant that you can prototype fairly quickly, and then when it works, they start spending time on it until it builds to something really good or something really interesting. And I think that obviously leaves space on the opposite end. So if you want to do something really complicated and you have the space to self-fund it, or you can get a publisher to do it, go for it. There's not that much competition in that space because it's a hard space. But for the average indie developer, no. What we discussed at the start of this call, this sort of like process of let's quickly get to does it work, I think that's the right answer. And then you can always figure out whether you're doing, you know, like early access or like live development or like Dominique. I love the strategy of just putting it on itch.io. Like, if people respond to it, you immediately have feedback, you immediately have a direction, you see how people are talking about it. And I think one of the most powerful things you can figure out for your game is with developers I work with, I always ask them, like, if your game comes out and 5 years from now, and I love it, right? I play your game and I love it, and 5 years from now, I'm thinking about your game, but I forgot the title of it. I forgot what it's called. I forgot who developed it. I just remember this game. I have this concept of this game. What is your... it's a game about stamping passports. That you would tell your friend to go, like, search for this and you will find it, right? And if you can't find that one sentence, yeah, exactly, like Dominic said, the hook, the USP, the thing, that 5 years from now, when I'm thinking about the game and it's sort of like a broken memory in the back of my head, I can go like, no, it's a game about like squishy astronauts backstabbing each other on a space station. That's one, right? There's no alternative game to that. So what is that statement? And if you can find that quickly, then I think you're making a good game.
Yeah, I think I think that's why like the sort of Survivor stuff really exploded recently. Like getting that kind of like core bit of gameplay and then after that it's like where it's extra content in terms of like monsters and the passives and your abilities and stuff like that. But it's so systemic to build on top of that, and very quickly you can end up with like, oh, this is a game you can spend 200 hours of your time at. Like if it's the Vampire Survivors clone that kind of has like the sort of setting and the things that particularly nudge your buttons, it's like you can spend a lot of time on that. And I think if you're making smaller things, or you like the development costs of things are lower, you don't have to appeal to the same size of audience that Call of Duty has to appeal to in order to recoup. It's like, yeah, sure, if your version of Survivors is you're on a farm and you're a weird frog, and it's like, but you can make that, and loads of people can, like, maybe you only need 20,000 people to be into that, and it's like, well, that's way more achievable than however many copies of COD Microsoft need to sell this winter.
Yeah, there's a lot more shift towards that. Like, the phrase that goes around is like, if you're making a game for everyone, you're making a game for no one. Like, finding those niches, finding those audiences who are missing something specific. I was talking about this on a panel a while back. Like, basically, finding the itch, the particular itch that's not being scratched right now. Like, at the risk of giving my own example, like there's a multiplayer game I enjoy called Deceive Incorporated, which is kind of that stealthy multiplayer where you are essentially disguised as an NPC, and everyone else is disguised as NPCs, and the enemy team have to work out who's the real player. And it is basically the Assassin's Creed 2009 multiplayer from Brotherhood, but no one has made that since 2009. So for me, it appeals, and for clearly a fair number of people, and I hope that game is doing well. So yeah.
Normally, when teams go to pitch, one of the things I tell them is the big trick of a game is not making sure that when people see it, that the right people love it. It's that the right people hate it. So when you're making a game, it's so easy to think of like, how can I make as many people like my game? But like I always tell people, like, if your game does not piss off a group of people, it's not strong enough in the direction of the people that you're trying to get it to love it, right? Because
nice.
it's so easy to want to look for, like, how do I make more people love it? How do I make more people love it? But if you can focus on, okay, this game is not for you. How do I communicate to you that this is not for you, that you will never click to my store page, that you will never come to my App Store page, my Steam page, that you will never buy this game. You see it for 5 seconds and you're like, nope, that ain't for me. If you can do that, then everybody who would like it will see that same thing and go, that's for me, right? And it's a way cleaner way of thinking about that. It's a way easier way to explain it, I feel. It's like, make sure you piss off the right people.
Nice. I think there's a whole other discussion to be had in pissing off the right people, which I may well have to hit you up about one day, Rami.
Sure.
We're starting to run a little low on time. I did want to ask, we've been talking about like abandoning games and abandoning and scrapping prototypes and so forth. Like, is it worth preserving those in any sort of way? Like, has there ever been a situation where you're working on another project and you're like, we need something, but this thing that we worked on that didn't work would fit really well here? Like, is that something that occurs, or do you just scrap it and delete it completely?
No, we always kind of mothball things, and the number of times that things have kind of come back and it's been like, oh, that thing. I mean, I get like Restless Ruins is this thing where you're building a dungeon that you walk through, and that came out of, we were prototyping another game that was like a top-down flying game, and the dungeon building bit was kind of like half of it. You were building a plane and then running around inside the plane, and the flying bit, we never managed to get the flying bit to feel good. But the building bit, it's like you could just click on add a new piece, and it was always satisfying to like clunk these bits onto your plane. It's like, should we just try making a game of just that bit, and like kind of what's the other bit that we can kind of pull onto that? So yeah, like I would never like completely go like, well, that's so bad that we can never talk of it again.
I think on our side I often try to I tell my programmers, listen, however well you prototype this, I'm going to delete the code at the end of it, because I really need my programmers to understand this is not code that needs to be pretty. I found the fastest way of convincing the programmers to not try too hard to write good code is just tell them no matter what, this is getting deleted, which frees them up a little. But obviously the ideas, the thoughts, the sort of like discoveries, the little clever tricks that you find very often do happen. For Gun Gods, which was one of Lambert's earliest games, that started as our first attempt to make a Nuclear Throne. And when we realized that for a top-down action game, it wasn't fun that players could just run by all the enemies because they had so much overview, my former co-founder, Jan-Willem Nijman, he decided, like, what if we try to render this in 3D and make it a first-person shooter? And then it turned out that same level design and the sort of like action pacing actually worked really well in a first-person shooter. And we tried 2 or 3 more shots at Nuclear Throne before we sort of like cracked it. But every time there was a game in between. So we would go like, nope, still ain't working, still haven't figured it out. Okay, let's try and make a game about fishing with machine guns. Let's try this top-down roguelike thing again. Still not there. Okay, let's make a game about airplanes. Let's try it again. And then we had this sort of like click moment of the exit to the level only appears when you kill the final enemy. And that completely fixed the tempo of because you couldn't walk past the enemies anymore. You had to shoot the enemies. And when that came together, Nuclear Throne worked. But every time we took what we learned from the other projects into that one. So of course you dismantle, you discard, you got to kill your darlings. And it's really easy to say like, oh, we have to hold on to things. We have to hold on to things. We have to keep this. We have to protect it. No. Like when you walk away from something, walk away from something. Because what you've learned, what you've gained, what you've come to understood comes with you anyway. I think when you make it so specific, like we have to protect this feature, like we have to do something, that's when it kind of becomes like, you start moving into doing creative decisions because of business decisions. We've already spent time on this, so I want to use it. Creative decisions, I think, needs to come from creative needs. So, if you're making something and you suddenly go, hey, didn't we do that? Yeah, cool, let's do that again. Sure. I try to not hold on to things, but I think this is a massive fight among developers. Like we all disagree on how to approach this. So this is just how I do it.
I'm going to let you wrap up, Dominique, with any kind of closing thoughts you've got, and then I'm going to wrap us up if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think as in terms of closing thoughts on the entire discussion, that I think you can see from having listened to everyone speak that that failing fast is not only a good idea, it's the only idea you should be sticking with when running a small studio. Or a big one.
Thank you. Or a big one, yes. Thank you all so much for your time today. Really, really do appreciate it, particularly given the schedules we've had to work around. Like to get this conversation together has been miraculous, but I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. And thank you, dear listener or viewer or reader or however you are enjoying this discussion for taking part and kind of listening through this. We are going to have more through GI Sprint. We're not 100% sure on the running order of these things, but there's plenty more from GI Sprint coming in the next few weeks of ways that you can make your games faster, better and cheaper, ways that you can improve the efficiency of your development processes. We're going to have videos, we're going to have more podcast versions of those videos, we're going to have some articles writing up, highlights from each of the panel sessions. We've got separate interviews like the one I've got with Tony. All of those we'll be able to find at GamesIndustry.biz. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back soon.